create space, time, matter, energy, and biology. So when you go into the source field, you have three-dimensional time. Time is no longer local, it's no longer linear, it's non-local and non-linear. You can jump around in time. And that's a discussion I got into in 2012 Enigma, and it's a discussion that I go into great detail about in the book with amazing, voluminous new information about this three-dimensional parallel reality that intersperses with our own reality all the time. Water appears to be the key. The water that's floating in the pineal gland is one of the main things that is able to flip-flop back and forth from our reality to a parallel reality. And I explain how that flip-flopping is possible in the book. And we're going to do it throughout this weekend in the conference that you guys are here to see. Then this inner retina is recording visual images that are coming in from whatever this water is doing. That seems to be the mechanism. The water is shielded off, and that automatically happens when you go to sleep. Every time you go to sleep, that pineal gland fires up, and then you actually have dreams which appear to be in a whole other reality. I have multiple studies in the book showing people having shared dreaming realities, clear examples time and again that the place that you go when you're remote viewing or when you're out of body or when you're dreaming is a real place. Also the place of ghosts. Ghosts or apparitions. There's a case of somebody that Raymond Moody talks about dying in the operating room, visiting their loved ones out of body. The loved one actually sees them as a ghost. They have a conversation. The person is then resuscitated, and they both remember the same conversation. So you were alive, but dead, and then while you're dead, you go visit somebody else, and they can see you, and you look just like a ghost. That's your existence in the source field. So if you're out there looking at things in your astral body, maybe somehow you're capturing those photons and bringing them back to the physical body. This brings us to this concept of DMT. Dr. Rick Strassman, of course, wrote the book DMT, the Spirit Molecule, a doctor's revolutionary research into the biology of near-death and mystical experiences. There's been a lot of intrigue around the idea of DMT. Why does it work? Why do all these shamanic potions seem to have so much of this chemical in them? Dr. Rick Strassman cites a lot of evidence in this book that the main point where DMT is synthesized in the body is the pineal gland. It has all the right receptors, all the right enzymes, all the right chemical catalysts, and we know that it has melatonin in it, and there's only a couple short chemical shifts that you have to make from melatonin to get DMT. Well, the problem is that DMT degrades so quickly that nobody's been able to autopsy a dead body fast enough to find DMT in the pineal gland, because it breaks down in just a few minutes. But this brings us to Nick Sand, who is the son of one of the scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project, which created nuclear bombs. Now, Nick Sand is personally responsible for manufacturing over 250 million doses of LSD. He was the main guy responsible for creating almost all of the acid that was being taken at Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco in the 1960s. He was the Pied Piper of LSD for sure. He got caught for it. He was given a 15-year jail sentence. He evaded it for some 23 years. He finally turned himself in 1996. He served a 4-year sentence and got out in 2000. Now that's all documented. He did his time. But while he was still at large, before he ever even got arrested, and he was out there synthesizing everybody's acid, he also synthesized DMT in the lab. And this is a direct quote from this Erowid Vault website. E-R-O-W-I-D is the website. And I quote this in the book. Here's the thing that happened. He found that DMT had full-color lighting effects on a very interesting level. Here's what happened. This is a quote from Erowid now. When hardened DMT that had collected in a tray after he synthesized it was being chipped out with a hammer and a screwdriver in a room that was brightly lit, the blows emitted massive amounts of colored light. So imagine this room is brightly lit. Imagine that I'm standing here and I have this tray and I hit it with a hammer and then you're seeing red, and then you see blue, and then you see green and yellow, and it's bright enough that it's like, wow, it really lights up the room. That's what they're saying here. But what was doing that was DMT. Now, what's the property of that? Well, if you ever had a cigarette lighter and you push the button down, it goes click, and then you see that spark. Do you know what that click is? Do you know how that spark is made? It's a crystal inside that's compressed. And through a process called piezoluminescence, the crystal, as it's compressed, those molecules release this burst of light, which releases photons. That's called piezoluminescence. That's how you get the spark that lights your cigarette. The same thing's been done with crystal radios. That's a piezoelectric crystal. The crystal actually is responding to electromagnetic waves, which are radio waves, and it actually vibrates in those waves, and you can pick it up. That's how they were able to make radios that don't require any electrical power. The electromagnetic frequencies of radio waves make that crystal vibrate, and then you can listen to it and pick up the radio. And depending on how tightly you compress the crystal determines what radio stations you'll get. Because as you tighten the pressure on the rock, it actually, the molecular distance narrows, and then it tunes into different frequencies of the radio spectrum. But here what we're seeing not only is piezoluminescence, but piezochromatism, which means that the photons the crystal gives off when it's compressed, in this case by hitting it with a screwdriver, actually change color. So if you wanted to have a nanotechnology projector, like what I'm using right now, but on a quantum level, if you wanted to get a full color image on a quantum level, you would need piezochromatic crystals to do that. You'd need crystals that when they're compressed, depending on how you compress them, release different colors, so you can actually get a full color image. That's what I'm actually saying is going on. The pineal gland has DMT crystals, calcite crystals, and other crystals that are floating around in that water, and they appear to be piezochromatic, meaning that as they're compressed by energy fields, they give off colors of light, different colors, a full color image, ultimately. When you shield off the electromagnetic signals going into your pineal gland by that energy firing up, the source field, which is just as energetic as electromagnetic energy, it's the same basic substrate, it's actually what gives rise to electromagnetic energy. The source field is able to vibrate those crystals and release the photons of whatever your astral body is seeing. So literally what I'm saying is that as your astral body is out there floating around looking at things, you pick up those photons, you send them back to your pineal gland, and then it vibrates those crystals and gets caught by the retinal tissue and fired into the visual cortex of the brain. This is explained by the idea of the silver cord. Many people, when they go out of body, claim to be seeing a silver cord that is connecting their astral body to their physical body. The vast majority of these reports say that the cord is connected at the exact location where the pineal gland would be, in the middle of the eyebrows or at the back of the head. And it's in the same location in your astral body. So what if this silver cord is actually a traversable wormhole? What if it is literally a stargate connecting your physical body to your astral body so that in your astral body you're looking at photons, and you could be sending photons through that cord out to where you're looking. Remember the Chinese remote viewing experiment? They saw photons appearing in the room. The photons are captured by your astral body. They shoot through the silver cord. They go into your pineal gland. And then, of course, it picks it up. So the key, again, is to shield yourself off from the conventional electromagnetic fields that are all around us most of the time. It's important to realize, too, that the water inside your pineal gland is the trick. If you don't have the water fully flowing, then calcium is going to build up because the pineal gland is not protected by the blood-brain barrier. So that calcification can actually grab onto the DMT crystals, the calcite crystals, and this has all been documented. Believe me, I'm not making this up. It's all in the book. The calcification can get so extreme, as you see here, that almost the entire pineal gland is just a bony lump that actually shows up on x-rays and allows them to figure out if you have a brain tumor, because the tumor pushes the brain off to one side and the bony lump actually moves. So look, you don't want this to happen. And the trick to making sure this doesn't happen is making sure that you're having a pure diet. There are so many things in our Western dietary system that calcify the pineal gland and will make you much less psychic. And that includes, the biggest offenders would be refined sugar, white flour, fried food, and factory-raised meat. If you can eat ethically raised organic meat, or none at all, but a little meat is good. If you can have, specifically fish would be like the best pineal gland activating meat to have. Organic fruits, organic vegetables, lots of fresh, clean water. Specifically, the best kind of water would be reverse osmosis. You want to get those minerals out of your body. You got to give your body a chance to decalcify. And the more organic and raw food you can eat, the faster that's going to work. Whereas all these other foods, like white flour, which is in everything, pasta, bread, that's going to calcify your pineal gland and make you notably less psychic. And if your pineal gland gets really, really calcified, it's related to anxiety disorders, mood disorders, schizophrenia. It's even related to tremors like multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease. All are correlated with a calcified pineal gland, as I reveal in the book. So I don't think that this information has remained obscure. I believe that the reason why you see the Great Seal of the United States on the back of the dollar with that third eye in the triangle on top, the reason why that's there is because they know about this. And you even see it here in this poster from the Da Vinci Code, the triangle around her eye. It's the same thing. Well, the source field is directly related to biology, and this is how we launch off into understanding these ancient prophecies of the dollar bill and everything else, which I'm going to get into that. We see now that we are actually emerging from the source field, that life is an emergent phenomenon that comes directly out of the basic laws of quantum physics. This was discovered very recently, just as the book was going to print. I'm so glad that I was a slacker and didn't get the book done on time, because as a result, I was able to get this study into the book, so important, from Dr. Luc Montagnier. Here he is, in his lab, Nobel Prize-winning scientist, who did this discovery, as you see in this headline, can our DNA electromagnetically teleport itself? One researcher thinks so. And if you read the bottom, it says, Nobel Prize winner Luc Montagnier describes a phenomenon in which DNA emits electromagnetic signals of its own construction, ghost DNA that can be mistaken by enzymes as the real deal and replicated in another place. Essentially, it's DNA teleportation. Now, this was all over the place. It was all over the science journals and everything. What you're seeing here is the actual picture in the middle describing how this was done. I like this image of him because here he's got two vessels of water next to him, and this is exactly what happened. He had one vessel of water that had DNA floating in it, just a little bit. And then another vessel of water, another test tube, that didn't have DNA in it. And it was totally sterilized water. And then all he did is electrify the two tubes that were hermetically sealed with a 7 hertz electrostatic signal, as you see where it says generator 7 hertz there. The tube on the left has the DNA, the tube on the right does not, but then after 18 hours of zapping, the tubes that did not have the DNA in it had all of the exact signatures of DNA being there. That's an astonishing fact. And it's very controversial, it's very cutting edge, because how in the heck do hydrogen and oxygen molecules in purified water turn into DNA? It completely boggles the rational mind. How in the heck could that happen? But it goes beyond that. This scientist, Professor Ignacio Pacheco, came up with this study, which is a big mouthful. But what we really want to focus on here is what he did. Pacheco takes a tube of regular water with sterilized beach sand that had been heated up to 1,000 degrees Celsius. He then lets it cool off, he puts it inside the test tube with the distilled water, he caps it off, and he sterilizes that, and then waits 24 hours, and this little scum grows at the top, which he called a surfactant, just to be scientific. Scum doesn't sound scientific enough. Now, if you don't sterilize the beach sand, if you just take this beach sand, dump it in the tube, sterilize the tube with the water in it, wait 24 hours, scrape it off, and look at it under a microscope, this is all you get. Just a bunch of blobs. The trick was sterilizing the sand. Just like in Montagnier's research, where he had those 2 tubes of water, he sterilized the water, okay? In this case, he gets these little guys growing in the water. But all it is in there is sterilized beach sand. This one actually looks almost like a brain. It's got 2 hemispheres. This clearly looks like it was the beginning of a plant that was growing. Obviously, it broke off in the course of going on the microscope slide. You can see where the stem broke off, and obviously the roots are no longer visible. And then even individual leaves started falling off from these little plants that were growing. Here's one of them. And here it is up close, an image of the cells inside the leaf. Very clearly a living biological creature, a little biological plant in this case. Here you see what looks like a red blood cell with a little diamond below it. That would be the silicon starting to crystallize. Now you see what looks like a white blood cell. Here we have what appears to be some sort of larger organism. It's a larger object. And in some of these cases, they begin to form a hard shell around them, almost as if they're becoming shellfish. This could be actually a spiraling little seashell starting to form. And then this guy, this is the one that really blew me away the most. You have a head, you have a body, you have a whole defensive system of spikes built around that creature. And I ask you this question: where the heck did his DNA come from? Where the heck did the DNA come from in Luc Montagnier's test tube that was zapped with 7 hertz electrostatic energy? The answer is DNA appears to be written right into the source field. It's written into the information that makes our reality. Now, not only is life being created by the source field, but it appears that you can beam in different codes to the source field and change one organism to another. This appears to be the real mechanism of evolution. And this was discovered by Dr. Peter Gariev using nothing more than laser light. This is what he did. Here he is on Russian television. Here he is doing a lecture. So you can see this is a real guy. Here he is in his lab. Now, the research that he conducted involved eggs that were laid by a frog. The eggs that were laid by a frog were still embryonic. They hadn't gone very far. Then he has a salamander. He takes the eggs from the salamander and zaps them with a green laser, and then redirects that laser light from the salamander eggs into the frog eggs. And by nothing more than that, the frog eggs had a complete metamorphosis and transformed into salamanders with no evidence of ever having come from a frog in the first place. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that the source field is the source of life. It is not random Darwinian mutation. Charles Darwin's father was a 33rd degree Mason. So do you think maybe there was a reason for them coming out with this idea that if you're the best killer, that you might be the most highly evolved on the planet? Well, it also, Darwinian evolution very conveniently removed the idea of a higher power. Oh, it can all be explained by random. It's just a bunch of things knocking together. There's nothing divine in the universe at all. You're just going to die and that's it. You don't exist anymore. Well, I don't believe that. I believe that human life, the DNA pattern that actually takes little particles, just like the water in Montagnier's test tube was rearranged into DNA, little particles can be rearranged into DNA, and that DNA can have the full template to build a human being. Sergeant Clifford Stone, one of the Disclosure Project witnesses in May 2001, testified that there were 57 different varieties of extraterrestrial that he was exposed to in the course of his work for the Black Ops divisions of the government. 57 varieties of extraterrestrial, and they all looked more or less human. The gray with the big eyes is about as far deviated from what we look like as any of them, and many of them look a lot more like us than you would believe. So this could all be explained by this idea that DNA is a quantum emergent phenomenon. Well, this brings us to the gods that are in every ancient culture. Who were they? What did they say? Every culture worldwide has human characters showing up with advanced capabilities, levitation, telekinesis, telepathy, beams out of their hands that can kill people with one If you get too close to them, you're trying to threaten them. Well, I'm just going to focus on a few of them. There's many more examples that I give in my all-weekend conferences. Here's the Egyptian god Osiris. Now notice the color of his skin. It's obviously green. And notice his hat. It's a very large hat, which seems unnecessary for the size head that he would normally have. Well, he's accredited with building the Osirian, where these massive blocks of stone, some of which are 100 tons, were effortlessly levitated into place, apparently. Now look at this. Here he is posing with others who do not have green skin. So what the heck is a green-skinned human doing among these other people? Well, the guy on the right wouldn't be a normal person either. He's got a hawk head. But the woman on the left doesn't have any unusual shaped head. That's probably one of the people from here. But there he is, sitting on his throne with green skin and this massive head. So that's a very interesting phenomenon. Then Osiris' son is Akhenaten. And again, he's wearing a massive hat. And you can see here the hat has a roundness to it at the top. Well, is that only a hat or is something else going on? Here's one of the images of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, his wife, with their children. Now notice from the side view that their heads are very large. The hat, at least, is very large. Well, the skeptic says that doesn't mean anything. Okay, here's another image of that from the side. And here's yet another image, a carving of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their children, where you can see again the very enlarged cranium behind Akhenaten. He's the one in the front. And there it is up close. Okay, here's another image of their little children. Notice they have the same funny little body shape that he does and that Nefertiti does. And again, they have these very strange heads, which we're going to get into that a lot more in just a second here. Here's another image of Akhenaten with a very large head. So you see this is a repeating theme over and over again, and there's that body shape. Now here's an image of Nefertiti, and once again you see the shape of the head appears to encompass more of that hat than would normally be human for us. There's something going on here. Here's another image of how large that hat is, taken from an actual sculpture of her that was found in one of the graves. Now here's another image. Now look at this. You see on the right, Nefertiti's head, it's got this very large pattern around it. And here's another carving showing the unusually sized head on the right. Now that's the one that really is the money shot. Because now what we're seeing is her head without any hair, without any hat on, a very enlarged skull. This is highly, highly anomalous. It's not like any skull we see on Earth. Just to make the point clear, there is a granite carving of their daughter Amarna, and look at that head. That is at least twice the size of a regular human cranium in terms of the brain capacity. You can look at this sculpture from all different angles, and you see this is a very, very unusual phenomenon that is occurring here. Even from the back, it looks much larger than a normal human head, and that would explain the hat. If you take that skull and then you illustrate where the hat would be, now what you're seeing is basically a nice, comfortable winter snow hat. You just put that sucker on. It doesn't need a whole lot more in the back, but that would be a normal-sized hat. To us, it looks enormous, but if your head is that big, then you need a hat like that in order to be comfortable. Now, here's another image of Akhenaten, it's a diorite stone, a much heavier stone, and you can see again the enlarged head. And here's another carving. This was a sketch showing that enlarged head of Nefertiti, and Akhenaten's on the left. Now here's another illustration of their daughters. Again, you see that very weird-looking skull. And I want to point out that there is a noticeable difference in the shape of their body from a typical human body. Now, this looks fairly similar, except that the ratio between the rib cage and the waist, where the hips are, is a noticeably smaller rib cage. There appears to be a larger height between the sternum and the pelvis. The rib cage appears to be at least 2 inches taken in on either side from where a normal human would be. And the spine appears to be a lot longer. The length of the spine appears to be longer. Now, people might say, oh, well, this is stylized. This isn't really how they really looked. I disagree, because every illustration we see of them is of them having this really, really narrow rib cage, the unusual pot belly, which, you know, some people say, oh, well, Akhenaten must have had Marfan's syndrome. That's the only explanation for that. It's not true. Everybody's got the same thing. And here we see when they're with their children, the children appear to be fully proportional adult proportions while they're still at the size where they should normally look like infants. So it appears that their heads come out smaller, and you can actually see that same oddly shaped head in the children. And here it is again, an illustration of these children. And they all have that same funny shaped body. You can especially see it in this one. First of all, look at the proportion of the child to Akhenaten. The child is only up to his knee, but it has almost an adult proportioned body. It has that same narrow rib cage, that same funny pot belly shape. Now we go to King Tut. Same thing. He's got that big, big hat on. Once again, this is a little gold sculpture of him. Now here's a sculpture of him taken from the front. This is not the one you usually see. From the front, it looks totally fine, but let's rotate that sculpture 90 degrees. Oh my God, there it is. King Tut. Nobody would have ever thought that King Tut wasn't a normal human being born on Earth, but when you see his head from an ancient Egyptian sculpture, it's too big, just like the others. And there are all these skulls that have been found that look just like that. These are over in Peru. Elongated skulls, just like what we were seeing here. Multiple skulls have been found like this, some of which are actually at the Rosicrucian Museum, the AMORC Museum, a little north of San Francisco. You can actually go see these skulls. So this is not something that's been fabricated. These have been discovered. They have yet to be explained. And when the gods came here, they brought with them a message, a mythological message, the most important thing they wanted us to know. They kept doing it over and over again, and they encoded this secret into all these different mythologies. The secret is this: a 25,000-year cycle in the Earth's orbit, which is called the precession of the equinoxes. Why would they do that? Why would they keep telling us the same message over and over again? Well, first of all, let's examine how that message came in. It was two notable historians in the 1960s, Giorgio de Santillana and Herta van de Schend, came up with this amazing work called Hamlet's Mill. And what you see on this book cover is the earth at the bottom with a tree coming out of it. That's often called in the ancient myths the world tree. Now, Graham Hancock believes that he's one of many that illustrate what these Santillana and van de Schend's scholarship concluded, which is that certain archaic myths from all over the world were co-opted, no other word will really do, to serve as vehicles for a body of complex technical data concerning the precession of the equinoxes. This includes everything from exact numbers to colors, all sorts of different ways they did this, but they did it over and over again. This is a mill. This is what you use to grind grain. In the middle of it is a central axis, then you have a sideways pole coming off of it at 9 degrees with a millstone through the pole. The pole goes through the middle of the millstone, and then you grind the millstone around this well where you put your seeds in, and then the seeds get ground up and they turn into grain. Then you pull the grain out through that little channel that you see in the front on the left. Here's another illustration of a different mill in which all the grinding is done in the middle of a bowl-shaped declivity, but you again have the central axis. Now, in these ancient myths, what they keep having is the idea that this central axis of the corn mill breaks, and that the whole mill breaks down, but that in the aftermath there is this golden age that's created. Now, Santillana and van de Schend believed that this metaphor of the corn mill is a metaphor of the Earth's axis. That as the miller is going around and grinding, it's the equivalent of the Earth's axis spinning in this 26,000-year cycle. And then these myths also have all the numbers of the precession, all the exact technical data is there. So Santillana and van de Schend conclude the original Amlodi, as his name was in Icelandic legend, which became Hamlet, is an elusive carrier of fate who must yield once his mission is accomplished and sink once more into concealment in the depths of time to which he belongs. He is the Lord of the Golden Age, the once and future king. Well, that's pretty darn interesting. Hamlet is the Lord of the Golden Age. This hero that shows up in all these ancient myths, the breakdown of the mill, corresponds to the coming Golden Age. They track this myth, this is a quote from the book, from the Northland to Rome, Finland, Iran, India, in Polynesian island legends, and the image stands for an astronomical process, the shifting of the sun through the signs of the zodiac, each of which is 2,160 years, adds up to 25,920 years together. So, each age brings a world era, a twilight of the gods. Great structures collapse, pillars topple, which supported the great fabric. Floods and cataclysms herald the shaping of a new world. And that's obviously happening to us now. As we follow the clues, stars, numbers, colors, plants, forms, verse, structures, a huge framework of connections is revealed at many levels. This is a true edifice, something like a mathematical matrix, a world image that fits many levels, all of it kept in order by strict measure. So Graham Hancock did all this research tying together Hamlet's Mill, and his conclusion was, it's not some quantum physics thing like the Jungian collective unconscious. It's actually a deliberate effort made by the gods who were contacting every culture, who looked human, maybe a little bit different, and then gave us this amazing information. And they always told us about the Earth's axis, this wobbling cycle, that it ends at a certain time, which is the end of the Mayan calendar, the year 2012, and that it ushers in a golden age. Now, in my work, and it's extensively documented in the book, I have gone through the entire solar system and showed how the planets are all experiencing climate change just like the Earth. This appears to be the literal fulfillment of the 2012 prophecies. And in the book, I also argue, and we'll do that throughout the rest of this weekend, that the galaxy is pushing us into this new energy zone, that the solar system is actually colliding with a cloud of energy that has a higher, I hate to use the term, but vibrational frequency. It's a higher density of energy in the source field. And that higher density is speeding up the vibration of atoms and molecules on Earth. It's making everything rev up and go faster and faster. Well, sure enough, if you actually go back through the fossil record, we find that there is a 25,000-year cycle in human evolution. 50,000 years ago, more or less, everybody on Earth suddenly